All right, thanks everyone for joining this next episode of 30 Minutes with a Hacker. We've got an interesting topic that we're excited to get into. With us here today as our guest is two individuals from Keller Schroeder, Corey Ainscough, as well as Brad Mathis, guys that have a tremendous experience in the industry. I think Brad's got like 35 years in the industry and Corey over 20 years. Corey is the Director of Information Security with Keller Schroeder, and Brad is their Senior Security Consultant. So guys with just a ton of experience in the industry. And with us from Tech Data is our typical team of ethical hackers / engineers, guys that have decades of experience out there in the trenches, guys that get brought in to consult with our government and military on the different types of nation-state attacks that are happening. So it's a very real and dangerous world out there, and so we're lucky to have the guys that we have from a Tech Data perspective, and we're constantly picking their brain every month, which is the kind of how the genesis of this call transpired. So to kind of get this going, I'm going to have Corey maybe just tell us a little bit about Keller Schroeder.
I'd be happy to do that. So Keller Schroeder is a premier technology company, and we say we're in the performance improvement business. We are located in Evansville, Indiana, and Nashville, Tennessee. We have been in business for 42 years, and our mission is to leverage technology tools and services to help our clients more successfully achieve their objectives. As a value-added reseller, system integrator, and employee-owned company, our owners are really passionate about making positive personal impacts, both on our employees, our clients, and communities. And we really strive to do that in 4 distinct areas of the company. We have applications, data strategy, infrastructure, and staffing. Those areas are kind of all come together from in a security space as well. And I'll briefly talk more about that here in a few minutes.
All right, that's great. Thank you, Corey. I know you guys are recognized not too long ago from the Fortune 100 best places to work. I think you guys actually ranked 21st, if I'm not mistaken. So congratulations for that. And you guys having 42 years in the industry, I know is very unusual. So we're really glad to have you guys on. Brad, I'm going to ask you to maybe set the table a little bit on the topic. Today's topic is on risk and really how to mitigate it against a breach. And also what to expect when there has been a breach. And I know you guys have just a ton of examples and experience in this space. So Brad, maybe to get this going, you can kind of set the table for the discussion.
Sure, no problem. So one of our key focuses with the information security team here is to assist our clients with methodologies and ways to reduce those opportunities for breach. What we have found out is I've been in the industry a long time. Corey, he had hair when he got in the industry. I had dark hair when I got in the industry. So, we've both been at it for a long time. But it's interesting because the causes, the breaches and everything like that over time, the breaches continue to evolve, the methodologies evolve, the bad guys get smarter. But what we're finding is it really always boils down to the same core issues. It's either a case of it's not one single thing, but it's poor or non-existent vulnerability management and patch management, poor or non-existent system hardening, and very often is poor or non-existent security awareness training. If you don't have those 3 key tenets there, it really sets you up for failure. And a lot of them are easy to overlook because for such a long time, IT was out of sight, out of mind. And as long as everything was running, everything's fine, right? And unfortunately, that's not the case. So we work with companies and try to help find ways to mitigate those issues.
Are you guys seeing any type of an uptick in breaches with what's going on with COVID and what we're all experiencing across the globe?
Not a huge uptick, other than the fact that with so many people working remotely now, we're seeing cases where maybe the laptop security, the portable computer security, things that they take home with them, is starting to wane just a little bit. some of the solutions that we use for vulnerability management, patch management, we're seeing that maybe people are just putting their system in sleep mode or hibernate mode and never reboot. And unfortunately, if you're applying patches, applying updates, those updates don't mean squat if you're not restarting or rebooting the machine because they never get applied. And unfortunately, the longer that goes on, the more vulnerable people are. And other things we're seeing too is, you recall Windows 7 was end of life last year because it's still out there. And now people are working from home. We're seeing more and more of that as well. Just upgrade when we come back to the office. And those people are definite targets. And all it takes is one of those targets to infiltrate a company.
And I think that's one of the things also that being as a remote worker, that a lot of the infrastructure at their home isn't all that secure. So again, if you are able to take advantage or penetrate a home network, then that individual a lot of times has a VPN connection back to their actual office. So then again, that's just a way to get a foothold inside of your organization when in all actuality, you're not even really at the office. You're working from home.
It almost makes your new perimeter, as many employees as you have, your new perimeter is all of those home networks. And of course, the companies don't have the same level of security around that. Most every corporation security is based on a walled garden. Well, now the walled gardens are many. They're at all of these different homes. And that's definitely created a big seam in people's cybersecurity strategy. Not processes, documentation, as well as dealing and detection of threats. All of those seams opened up, and very little has been done to address them because everyone's been scrambling to keep the wheels rolling. So this is that time where you probably have found your legs, and it's time to go back and look at some of those fundamentals, like you mentioned earlier, Brad, so that you can move forward with confidence that you're not exposing yourself to unnecessary risk longer than you have to.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And on the third one on the issues that you mentioned there, the third one that I talked about was security awareness training. And the fact that everyone is working from home now, when they're in the office and they're doing the required security awareness training, they're kind of a captive audience. They're going to get it done. The verdict is out as far as productivity and all of that, whether it's up or down with people working from home. I support it. I think it's great. The problem is you may have people that are homeschooling their kids. They're running errands. They're kind of interweaving their time, and they have security awareness training, but then whenever the actual attacks come in, they may be a little bit more passive, flippant. I don't know what the word would be, but something comes in the inbox. Yeah, it looks right, and I'll click on it. And unfortunately, what they would have been a little more cautious about in the past, they may be not as cautious now. So even within, at KellerSchrader as a provider, we want to make sure that our people are trained top-notch. So we take it very, very seriously. And we've been ensuring that everybody is getting that security awareness training done. And we've been ramping up the fish testing so that we're actually sending in a little bit harder fish examples as opposed to the easy ones. And because we're not doing it to try to trick them, we're doing it to make sure that we have that layer of vulnerability taken care of, the human layer.
Important to have that objectivity, right? So that's something you help your customers gain competency in and strengthen their capability. When you bring in an outsider's perspective, you obviously get a different way of thinking about it, and therefore you end up finding things that an organization wouldn't necessarily find for themselves. So it's a great strategy and a great value that you offer your customers.
One other perspective I would throw in regarding awareness training is, we focus a lot on just the normal users, but I think the IT staff and even the security staff get overlooked a lot too. A lot of companies don't have the proper budgets for training. A lot of the security personnel aren't even aware of the security policies if they even exist. And then on top of that, they don't rehearse. They don't go through tabletop exercises. They don't test like if a company has a backup solution in place to help with ransomware, the backup solution might technically exist, but they've never actually tested it to see if it works. So I think a lot of companies should invest some time and resources in making sure that the security and IT personnel have all the resources they need, have all the training they need, and the awareness that they need to handle a breach if it comes their way.
Yeah, on that note, guys, so if one of your customers were to come up to you as security consultants and say, look, we're sending all of our employees home for a couple of months, and we have no idea how to deal with this, what are just a couple high-level points? What are those highest value pieces of security advice that you could give to a company that's about to send their workforce back home with using whatever device to access corporate data? What are you guys suggesting right off the bat?
That is a loaded question. I'll tell you why. It really largely depends upon the size of the organization. It depends upon how mature their current processes were already. That's where our assessments come in handy, as we will work with companies and find out, do your users have local admin access? Do they all have the same default administrator password on their system, or have you implemented something like Microsoft Labs to obfuscate every single password on every single system so that that system is not as attackable? Are they using full disk encryption? If they're not, they should be. Do they have multi-factor authentication to where when they're going to log in and connect to their, whether it's SharePoint, Office 365, you name, whatever it is, VPN access, are they being prompted with some sort of multi-factor type of option? And depending upon the situation, if they're prepared, yeah, that's great. Just keep in mind, you have to keep these defenses up. But if you talk to a client that says, you know what, we don't have any of that, it's like, well, you've got some decisions to make, because you need to realize as a company, there's a level of risk that you're going to have to agree that you're willing to accept. Because if that risk is too high, you may have to come up with some alternative arrangements, whether it's providing somebody secure systems that are already encrypted and password protected and so on, or whether you say, you know what, can't work from home. You're going to have to come in for a while until we get these solutions in place. So it is a loaded question for that reason, because every environment is slightly different.
And with all of the work from home, return to work, and going back and forth over and over again, those seams are going to exist for some time. I think it's safe to say that there won't be a point where everything goes back to where it was, 120 days ago. And so because of that, every strategy, even if you have most of your people return to the office, there's still going to be a higher transiency of your people working from remote locations. And when that is the case, your cybersecurity practice, technology, documentation, and remediation is probably not up to date with that new way that everybody's going to be functioning. And so it's really important that organizations try to eliminate those blind spots. Otherwise, it's from the blind spot that you'll get bit.
That's very true. And John, I believe it was John that mentioned it earlier, talking about the disappearing perimeter, the fact that, it used to be the castled wall situation, but now everybody is out and about. And so we've already been looking into other security solutions and opportunities to protect people no matter where they are. And for vulnerability management perspective, we focus on an agent-based type solution, so that it really doesn't matter where they are. We can tell at any time what the posture is, what the patch management level is, and hopefully even correct those, remotely.
And I think that brings up a good point, Brad, because I think a lot of times what we find in the industry is a lot of times businesses don't even understand what they have in the environment and or what those machines are, what the equipment is that's going to a home office. So that's just a piece of information just to pass along, is making sure that the inventory is there, understanding that what you have, where is it, so that you can truly patch and harden those systems if they are remote or if they come back on site.
This is an old example, but what you just mentioned there about not knowing what you have. I worked for an organization one time, very large organization in healthcare, and we had a very strong stance on making sure that everything was updated, everything was patched, that everybody had strong passwords. We thought we were doing fantastic. But what we hadn't thought about were those third-party solutions. And this is a case where, and this is many years ago, but this is a case where there was actually a FedEx shipping machine, and it was on the same network as everybody else, because that's the way you did it back then. And come to find out, it was running, I don't even recall what it was running, an old version of XP or something. It had never been patched, never been updated. A consultant came in, a contractor, had something on their system. It was a wormable type of situation. It infected the FedEx machine, and it was causing a denial of service on the rest of the network, and we could not figure out what it was. And that's when we learned the very important part about segmentation, making sure that third-party systems are isolated and only the systems that you control are on your internal networks. But I mean, that's a great example right there.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic example, Brad, because I think we've seen it previously where businesses, as you walk into public spaces, don't have any type of port control in place. So anyone off the street could physically go in, plug in some sort of device of any sort, be able to gain access pretty easily by just plugging something in. And then from that point on, it's kind of game on. So again, the kind of the port control and segmentation, they're all items that come together as layers of defense in depth for us to be able to kind of protect and safeguard organizations in today's world.
I had something like that just, it was actually just this last month. It was a security assessment for a smaller company. They had never had an assessment before, and I was very clear with them when we come in. I said, we don't come in to be like we're the big, bad, mean auditors. We come in to find a baseline, find out where you are, and then give you some recommendations for reducing your risk. And in this case, it was an internal vulnerability penetration assessment as well as a wireless observation, just high level. And so I looked at their guest wireless and their public wire, or their internal wireless. And they were both running just pre-shared key, which is not good. They weren't running 802.1x. But when I got out of the guest network, I realized that the DHCP string that it gave me put me on the same exact network as their internal network. And I said, now, do you understand what's going on here? And they did. I mean, especially their IT consultant that was there, he did. It was kind of like a oh crap moment. But the way I explained it to the owners of the company was, think of it like this. Would you leave a data cable from anywhere in your network out in the parking lot to where somebody could come up and just plug into it? And he goes, absolutely not. And I said, well, that's technically what your public wire or your guest wireless is doing now. And he said, well, what can we do about it? I said, right now, turn it off. I said, it's not that important. And they turned it off.
I'm curious, when you guys first come in and do an assessment, you already mentioned some key controls to have around segmentation and checking open ports within a firewall and all of that. What are some additional controls that you might have or look for when you first do an assessment or an audit in a customer environment?
Corey's pointing to me, so here we go. Typically, it's a case of trying to find out, do they have an inventory? Corey has already mentioned that, but we'll ask, do you have a list of your IP ranges, your server subnets, and so on? And the reason we ask for that, we're not trying to come in with a black box approach where we're coming in as the big bad hacker that doesn't know the environment. We let them know that we can do that, and we have done that, but it's a whole lot more expensive to go that path because we have to take the time to discover all that. If it's more of a white or gray hat type of situation, we will come in and ask for that and then start walking through things. What are you doing now? Maybe some conversations. What type of endpoint protection do you have in place? Do you have any sort of patch and vulnerability management in place? And then maybe even ask about their training. And once we kind of get an idea with those, we typically, one of the first things we do is a discovery of the environment. Just for lack of a better term, a fancy Nmap. So we will do a discovery of the environment. We will look for low-hanging fruit. We may say, okay, it looks like your servers are in fantastic shape, but your workstations may need a little work. But one of the most common things that we find are default credentials. We will look at an environment and we will find printers that have never been password protected, which, you know, most printers have an underlying operating system of Linux. Well, if I'm a bad guy and I'm going to try to infiltrate an organization, I'm going to try to find the low-hanging fruit. I'm going to try to find out where I'm not going to be detected, and then I'm going to see, is there anything I can do to backdoor that system and make it a pivot point to attack the rest of the environment? So I know I've used that industry buzzword of low-hanging fruit probably too many times, but that is one of the things that we look for, and we try to point out the things that are often overlooked and forgotten.
And that's pretty common, right, Brad? I mean, just from the standpoint of someone from the outside, they're going to look for the easiest way to get into the organization. A lot of times that's a phishing attempt or a spear phishing attack where they're getting that email, someone's clicking on an attachment or a link, and then at that point in time, they have their foothold in the organization. So not much different than what a true attacker, the steps that they go through. We just try to inform the clients kind of the process that we're walking through to educate and to inform them of the process so they can kind of think that way moving forward, to understand here are the safeguards, here are the different mitigation items that we need to put in place in order to try to help secure the environment.
And I know that Dylan and Daniel are coming from our red team, and that's definitely something that they encounter on a regular basis when they're either doing vulnerability assessments or penetration tests.
Yes, that's exactly right. Whenever Brad mentioned, default credentials on printers, I had a big grin on my face because we've had engagements where that comes right across, and I'm like, it's a Linux system. Game over right there. I can get a foothold here and do whatever I want for this. You can use it as a zombie attack for other devices if I want to. And you're going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out where that comes from.
Oh, yeah. And I tell you what, one of the most common things I find in organizations are the things that they didn't even know they had. And a good example would be, an old Dell, and I'm not knocking Dell, I'm just using them as an example, but an old Dell server that's being used as a, VM ESX or something. They'll have the lights out boards, like Dell has iDRAC.
Yes.
Has one. And if I find iDRAC, the first thing I do is try root and Calvin. I try to see if I can get in. And if I can, I own that system. I even find Supermicro with the default login and passwords. They're still in certain environments. And it's like, if you can get a console to a system that easy, you own the environment. And you're not doing it to make them look bad. You're doing it to say, hey, here's what we found. It's a good thing we found it before the bad guys did. Now, here are some recommendations on what you might want to consider doing.
And it's really good that you're using that as a teachable moment for them, showing them here's what somebody could do. Please secure this and give them the correct steps to secure it. That's really good.
Yeah, and sometimes we'll do an assessment, and it'll be even an external assessment. There was a situation a couple of years back that I recall. If we find something that's egregious enough that it can't wait until the report is done, we'll call them right then and there and say, hey, you need to fix this. And a good example is a couple of years ago, I was doing an assessment, and all they wanted was an external assessment. And I tried to convince them. I said, you realize that external assessment is just like 1% of your issue there. Everything else is internal. I really strongly recommend we do internal as well, but it was a budget thing. So we did the external, and I found that they had their healthcare, their EMR, actually had the SCSI interface for the fixed disks published to the internet with the default credentials. And at that point, I was able to send them some screenshots and say, I could have reformatted everything. I could have done this. I could have done that. You need to fix this now. And they did. Of course, like I told them, I said, it'll go in the report, but as an observation that was reported and fixed. And so, yeah, there's defaults are, that's the exciting stuff, because when you find that, you're like, oh, man.
Yeah, defaults, I think, Brad, in addition to that, I would say end-of-life operating systems and end-of-life software. Windows 7 has been, end of life now for quite a while, but I know it takes quite a long time to get those replaced. But it seems like every day that goes by, there's something new coming out for those. And those machines, the Windows 7, the 2003 servers, 2008 servers, those are easy targets when it comes to an organization environment. And that's, again, just one of those situations that we come into, we identify those, and 9 times out of 10, you could have the entire organization that it is fully patched. It has great endpoint security software running, but there's that one device setting off in the corner that hasn't been hardened, hasn't been patched, hasn't been secured in any way. You're able to attack that one machine, and then you're able to move around the environment and get a considerable amount of information. And that's where it really comes into, again, educating the business and informing them what just happened and communicating that so that they can continue to grow from a security standpoint and the business can improve.
I do recall Corey doing an assessment recently, and the example is fantastic because he wasn't trying to be mean. He was trying to make a point. And he shows the person that maybe it's being a little mean, but the person that he was showing the example to, he just puts up a number, and he said, does this number look familiar? And the person's face was like, yes, it does. It was his social security number. And he's like, well, I found that along with multiple others out in the unprotected data stores that everybody in the organization has access to. Let's talk about data security.
There's nothing that quite gets someone's attention as it does whenever you tell them what their social security number is. That'll pretty much stop them in their tracks. But it gets people's attention, right? I mean, that's important whenever you're talking about the data, because that's what everyone's after, right? It's the data that lives inside of an environment, and it's either you're encrypting it or you're doing data exfiltration to get it out of the environment in order to do something else with it. So it's incredibly important to give those examples to our clients, and when we have these assessments that we perform, it's just very good to at least give them a redacted example to make sure that they understand the severity of the situation.
Well, and it's not only default credentials, but it's also default configurations. I know that John and Josh just did a demonstration of an endpoint security where they had, I believe, a 2008 server. They launched an attack against it, and there were great technologies in place to detect, but they showed that if you took a little bit of time, you could also automatically remediate those threats. And so I don't know if you guys want to add a little bit more to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it wasn't meant to single out that one product, but yeah, like you were saying, Brad, it's just the general concept of a lot of companies will invest significant portions of their security budget on these, next generation, advanced products, but then they'll just kind of set it and forget it. And while that, if you're lucky, will provide you some protection or at best detection, like you were saying, if you have skilled analysts or skilled IT staff that actually know how to correctly implement it, adjust the policies. A lot of it comes down to being able to test those policies, but you can really leverage those tools the way they're supposed to, so that you can maximize your investment and get the most protection out of them. I think kind of just one of the points we hit on all the time is time and money, right? Like I think it's important when a company is setting aside a budget for a specific tool or product to not just look at the retail value of that box, but also think long term and how many man hours am I going to need to allocate in order to actually install and implement this correctly? How many man hours is it going to take to properly monitor this device? How can I integrate it with my SIM, and how can I test rules to effectively to use it? I think people really need to start thinking long term instead of just what tool can I buy to do all the things like that just doesn't exist.
I'm glad you said that, actually, John, because we've recently had this discussion too when we talk to a client or someone that's a case of, yes, we understand that you have XYZ endpoint protection. We understand that you have these things in place. It's all about the configuration, because you can have the best product in the world, but if it's put in with defaults or if it's put in with a poor configuration, then the product isn't worth its weight. And so we have recently partnered up with an organization, and we're doing a breach and attack simulation. And with that breach and attack simulation, that's a situation as well, to where we can go in and test their endpoint protection. We can test how effective it is, throw tons of neutered ransomware at it, if you will, and malware, and see what's its score, how strong was it. And the beauty of that is, even internal, we definitely do that internally here, because we're a target as well, and we want to make sure we're not on the front page either. But we've used those tools against ourselves, and actually been able to find little flaws in some of our endpoint protection settings and strengthen those. So definitely about the configuration.
I think kind of what you were just touching on there is a concept that we really push hard at the cyber range, is the concept of Team Purple, getting the red team and blue team to work together.
Yeah.
And the way to properly test and configure those devices is to get both of those sides working together in an iterative type process. So you got red teams lobbing attacks, blue teamers are right there watching them do it, and then saying, okay, that attack produced this result. What can we do to strengthen it? And then just rinse and repeat until you've locked everything down.
Yeah. Josh Hart, did you have anything you wanted to just add? I know we need to wrap this call up, but I wanted you to just.
Yeah, I think to be succinct, right? Installation versus implementation. Installation is going to be quick and easy, and you can have it installed. But if you don't fully implement it, it'll just become shelfware. John really talked through that process. And then the concept of purple teaming, right? It's what every organization needs to be doing if they're not doing it already. And it needs to be routine because penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, they're all good, but more often than not, organizations look at them as pass or fail. So they try and hide different areas or different portions of their network and what you can have access to. I think you guys mentioned it earlier. You wanted to do an internal penetration test on the customer environment, but they hadn't wanted to do that right away. When you go into a purple team mindset and you understand red and blue is working collaboratively together, people are more open and available to and willing to discuss some pain points for them. So I'm fully on board with what John said. I think this is the way we actually can continue to improve security because the offensive security operators, engineers, and hackers all out there do have the upper hand. And when the cat can teach the mouse how it catches it, and the mouse can teach the cat how it evades it, then we all work better together.
I think that's a really good point too. I wanted to mention here because I think it's important to know and understand that our team, the security team at AboutkellerSchrader, we actually leverage a completely separate team within KellerSchrader to do more of the blue team aspect. So we have one red team, we have the blue team, and we do collaborate. We work together at the organizations in order to put in those safeguards to protect the client environment so that they can be in a better position. So I think that's a great point, Josh.
With that, we'll wrap this call up. This has been an awesome conversation, great discussion. Corey and Brad, thank you very much for being on this call and representing KellerSchrader. And you guys are definitely one of the leaders in the industry, and we're really thrilled that you guys could be on and share your insights with us. And thanks to the team at Tech Data, your insights and the things that you share as well. So with that, we'll wrap this up and look forward to next month's call on 30 Minutes with a Hacker.